The bridge of the Coalition warship was quiet, except for the soft hum of failing life support systems. Commander Zixtal stared at the tactical display with 4 eyes that had seen too much death in the past 6 months. Red markers showed Vorthon, Empire ships advancing through the Kepler sector like a disease spreading through healthy tissue. Each red dot represented thousands of his people dying. "Sir, we lost contact with the 7th Fleet," reported his communications officer, a young Altarian whose blue skin had turned pale with fear. "The Vorthons broke through their defensive line an hour ago." Zixtal closed his eyes and felt the weight of command crushing down on his shoulders. The Coalition had been fighting the Vorthon Empire for 2 years now, and they were losing badly. Every battle ended the same way. The Vorthons would attack with overwhelming force. The Coalition would try to defend, and then the Coalition would retreat to the next system to repeat the process. The problem was simple. The Coalition was made up of peaceful species from Garden, worlds where the biggest threat was bad weather, or maybe a small earthquake. Most Coalition soldiers had never seen real combat before this war started. They were engineers, scientists, farmers, and artists who had been given weapons and told to fight professional warriors. The Vorthons were different. They came from a harsh world where only the strong survived, and they had been conquering their neighbors for centuries. Their soldiers were born to fight, trained from childhood to kill, and equipped with weapons designed for one purpose: destroying their enemies completely. "How many ships do we have left in the entire sector?" Zixtal asked his tactical officer. 43 combat vessels, sir. The Vorthons have over 200. Zixtal nodded slowly. The numbers told the story clearly enough. In 6 more months, maybe less, the Vorthon Empire would control half the galaxy. In a year, they would control all of it. The Coalition Council, back on Nexus Station, kept sending messages about diplomatic solutions and peaceful negotiations. But the Vorthons were not interested in peace. They wanted conquest. 3 days later, Zixtal found himself in the emergency session of the War Council on Nexus Station. The massive conference room was filled with representatives from a dozen species, all of them looking as desperate as he felt. Admiral Kexaron, the Coalition's supreme commander, stood at the center of the room with his 6 arms spread wide in a gesture of helplessness. "The situation is clear," Admiral Kexaron said in his deep, rumbling voice. "We are losing this war. Our forces are outnumbered, outgunned, and outfought at every engagement. If we continue on this path, the Coalition will cease to exist within 1 standard year." A Centaurian diplomat raised her delicate hand. "What about the reserve fleets from the inner systems?" "Already deployed and destroyed," the Admiral replied. "The Vorthons have superior technology, superior tactics, and superior warriors. We need help from someone who can match their military capabilities." The room fell silent. Everyone knew there were no other major powers in the galaxy who could help them. The Coalition represented the largest alliance of species in known space, and they were being crushed like insects under a boot. "There is one possibility," said Dr. Veltar, the Coalition's chief xenobiologist. The elderly scientist had been quiet throughout the meeting, but now all eyes turned to his wrinkled face. "The quarantine worlds," a wave of shocked murmurs swept through the room. The quarantine worlds were planets that had been classified as too dangerous for normal contact with galactic civilization. Most were death worlds where the environment was so hostile that only the most aggressive species could survive. "You cannot be serious," said the Centaurian diplomat. "Those worlds are quarantined for good reasons. The species there are violent, unpredictable, and dangerous." Dr. Veltar nodded slowly. "Yes, they are dangerous, but so are the Vorthons. Perhaps we need dangerous allies to fight dangerous enemies." Admiral Kexaron studied the old scientist carefully. "Which world are you thinking of?" "Sol 3. The planet they call Earth." The room erupted in argument. Earth was one of the most heavily quarantined worlds in the galaxy, classified as a Class 12 death world. The dominant species there, called humans, had been under observation for decades, but no official contact had ever been made. The reports from the monitoring stations painted a picture of a species so violent and aggressive that they regularly fought wars against their own kind. The humans are barbaric, protested a vegan representative. They have nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. They fight wars over resources, territory, religion, and political ideas. Their entire planet is covered with the ruins of ancient conflicts. Exactly, said Dr. Veltar. They are warriors, natural-born fighters who have spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill efficiently. They might be the only species in the galaxy who can match the Vorthons in combat. Admiral Kexran raised his hand for silence. The Council has considered this option before. The humans are unpredictable. We have no idea how they would react to first contact, and we cannot control them once we make contact. Can we control the Vorthons? Dr. Veltar asked quietly. The question hung in the air like poison gas. Everyone in the room knew the answer. The Vorthons could not be controlled, negotiated with, or stopped by conventional means. They were a force of nature that consumed everything in their path. The monitoring reports show that humans have developed faster than light travel, Dr. Veltar continued. They have built warships, space stations, and weapons that our analysts cannot fully understand. Their military technology appears to be centuries ahead of most coalition species. How is that possible? Asked the Centaurian diplomat. They are a single-planet species with no access to galactic technology. They are innovators, Dr. Veltar replied. They solve problems by building better weapons. While we have been sharing technology peacefully for thousands of years, they have been competing against each other, constantly improving their military capabilities. Zixtal had been listening to the debate with growing interest. As a military commander, he understood something that the diplomats did not. The coalition needed warriors, not more engineers or scientists. They needed someone who understood warfare at the most basic level. What do we know about their military organization? He asked. Dr. Veltar activated a holographic display showing various human military units. They divide their forces into specialized branches: armies, navies, air forces, and space forces. Each branch uses different tactics and equipment, but they coordinate their efforts effectively. They have professional soldiers who train for years before seeing combat. Professional soldiers, Zixtal repeated slowly. Most coalition species had citizen militias or part-time defense forces. The idea of full-time warriors was foreign to their peaceful cultures. Their soldiers are volunteers, Dr. Veltar continued. They choose to be warriors. They study warfare as if it were a science, constantly developing new tactics, weapons, and strategies. Their military academies produce officers who understand combat at levels we can barely comprehend. Admiral Kexran looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues. Fear and desperation were written clearly on every face. The coalition was dying and everyone knew it. If we contact the humans, he said slowly, we will be opening a door that we can never close. Once they know about galactic civilization, everything will change. Everything is already changing, Zixtal said. The Vorthons are making sure of that. The question is whether we want to die as a free alliance or live as subjects of the Empire. The vote was close, but desperation won over caution. The Coalition Council authorized first contact with Earth, requesting military assistance in exchange for technology and membership in galactic civilization. 3 days later, the message was transmitted toward the Sol system. On Earth, Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force received the first communication from an alien civilization. The message was simple. We are at war. We need your help. Jake stared at the translation for a long time before reaching for his secure communications device. Humanity was about to learn that they were not alone in the universe, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when evolution created the perfect warriors. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center of the UES Liberty, watching the alien space station grow larger on the main screen. Nexus Station was massive, bigger than anything humans had ever built, with elegant curves and flowing designs that looked more like art than architecture. But Jake's trained eye could see the defensive weapons hidden in those beautiful structures. First time meeting aliens and they want us to fight their war for them, said Colonel Ryan Brooks, the Liberty's commanding officer. Can't say I saw that coming when I joined the Space Force. Jake nodded, still studying the station. The past 2 weeks had been the strangest of his military career. The alien message had been simple enough. They were losing a war and needed Earth's help. What followed was a crash course in galactic politics, alien technology, and the disturbing revelation that humanity had been watched for decades without knowing it. "You think this is a trap?" asked Lieutenant Colonel Amy Rodriguez, Jake's second-in-command. She was a veteran of 3 different Earth conflicts and had the suspicious nature that kept soldiers alive in hostile territory. "If it is, it's an expensive one," Jake replied. "Building a fake space station this size just to trick us would be harder than actually fighting their war." The Liberty docked with Nexus Station using human technology that the aliens had somehow learned to accommodate. Jake wondered how long they had been studying Earth's ships and what else they knew about human capabilities. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Jake got his first look at a living alien. Ambassador Zixtal was tall and thin with 4 arms, and gray skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. His 4 eyes focused on Jake with an intensity that reminded the captain of a hunting animal evaluating prey. "Captain Morrison," Zixtal said in heavily accented English. "Welcome to Nexus Station. I am honored to meet the first human representative to our civilization." Jake shook one of the alien's hands, noting that Zixtal's grip was weak compared to a human's. "Thank you for the welcome, Ambassador. We're here to discuss your request for military assistance." As they walked through the station's corridors, Jake observed everything with a soldier's eye. The aliens moved with careful, measured steps. Their security personnel carried weapons that looked more like tools than weapons of war. The entire place felt peaceful, civilized, and completely unprepared for serious combat. The conference room was filled with representatives from a dozen different alien species. Jake had studied the intelligence files during the trip, but seeing them in person was still shocking. They looked like creatures from fantasy stories, beings with tentacles, extra arms, strange skin colors, and body shapes that defied human understanding. "This is our military council," Zixtal explained as Jake and his team took seats around the curved table. "They will brief you on our current tactical situation." Admiral Kexran activated a holographic display showing star systems, fleet positions, and battle reports. The scale was enormous, covering hundreds of light years and involving millions of ships and soldiers. But what struck Jake immediately was how predictable everything looked. "The Vorthans use standard formation attacks," the Admiral explained. "They group their fleets into large formations and attack our defensive positions with overwhelming force. We have been unable to develop effective countermeasures." Jake studied the tactical data while Sergeant Major Kevin Turner and Master Chief Patricia Wells took notes. All 3 humans exchanged glances that said the same thing. These aliens fought wars like they were playing a board game with fixed rules. "What kind of countermeasures have you tried?" Amy asked. "We have reinforced our defensive positions, improved our shield technology, and attempted to match their numbers with larger fleets," Admiral Kexran replied. Kevin cleared his throat. "Have you tried not being where they expect you to be?" The aliens looked confused. "I do not understand," said Admiral Kexran. "Ambush tactics," Patricia explained. "Hit-and-run attacks, making them fight on your terms instead of theirs. Basics. Guerrilla warfare." "Guerrilla warfare?" Zixtal repeated the unfamiliar term. Jake realized they were dealing with species that had never developed irregular warfare tactics. Their entire approach to conflict was based on formal, structured battles between organized forces. The idea of hiding using deception or attacking from unexpected directions seemed foreign to them. "On Earth, we call it asymmetric warfare," Jake explained. "When you're outgunned, you don't fight fair. You use every advantage you can find, to even the odds." Dr. Rachel Morgan, Earth's xenobiologist, had been quietly studying the aliens throughout the meeting. "Your species evolved on peaceful worlds," she said suddenly. "Low-stress environments with abundant resources and few natural predators." The aliens shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Morgan's clinical analysis was making them nervous. "Earth is different," she continued. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world filled with dangerous predators, natural disasters, diseases, and resource scarcity. We learned to survive by being adaptable, aggressive, and creative." "Adaptable how?" asked Zixtal. Amy smiled, and several aliens instinctively moved back from her expression. Human smiles, Jake realized, probably looked like predatory displays to prey species. "We change our tactics based on the situation," Amy said. "If direct attack doesn't work, we try indirect attack. If that doesn't work, we try sabotage, psychological warfare, economic disruption, or political manipulation. We keep changing until something works." General Carl Stevens, the senior military advisor, leaned forward. "Show us everything you know about Vorthan military doctrine, technology, and psychology. We'll find their weaknesses." For the next 6 hours, the aliens presented detailed information about their enemies. Jake and his team asked questions that clearly made the coalition representatives uncomfortable. They wanted to know about Vorthan supply lines, communication systems, leadership structures, recruitment methods, and cultural weaknesses. "You study your enemies very thoroughly," observed Dr. Veltar, the coalition's xenobiologist. "Know your enemy and know yourself," Kevin quoted. Ancient Earth military wisdom. "How ancient?" asked Dr. Veltar. "About 2,500 years, Patricia replied casually. The aliens exchanged shocked looks. Humans had been studying warfare for millennia, developing and refining their understanding of combat across centuries of conflict. During a break in the briefing, Jake overheard a conversation between two coalition officers in what they thought was a private alcove. The station's translation system was still active, so he understood every word. "These humans are terrifying," one was saying. "They think about warfare like we think about engineering problems. Cold, logical, systematic. You see how they analyze the Vorthan data?" The other replied. "They found weakness patterns in 10 minutes that our strategists have been missing for 2 years. And their questions," the first continued. "They want to know about Vorthan families, their culture, their fears. Why would that matter in warfare?" "Because they plan to use it against them," the second said quietly. "They are not just soldiers, they are predators." Jake pretended not to have heard, but the conversation confirmed what he had suspected. The coalition species were herbivores or peaceful omnivores who had never developed true predator instincts. They fought wars like scientists conducting experiments, following established procedures, and expecting predictable results. When the briefing resumed, General Stevens presented his preliminary assessment. "The Vorthans are professional soldiers, but they're predictable. They use superior numbers and firepower to win through direct confrontation. They've never faced an enemy that refuses to fight on their terms." "What do you recommend?" asked Admiral Kexran. "Give us a small force to work with," Stevens said. "Let us show you how humans fight wars. We'll demonstrate tactics that will make the Vorthans reconsider their entire approach to conquest." Zixtal looked around the room at his colleagues. Fear and hope warred in their alien expressions. They needed help desperately, but they were beginning to understand that humans approached warfare from a completely different perspective. "How many soldiers would you need?" Zixtal asked. "For a demonstration?" "A few hundred," Stevens replied. "For the real war? We'll need to discuss that after you see what humans can do with proper motivation and adequate resources." The meeting ended with tentative agreements and careful diplomatic language. But Jake could see the truth in the aliens' eyes. They had expected to hire mercenaries or military advisors. Instead, they had discovered a species that treated warfare as both art and science, constantly evolving their methods to stay ahead of their enemies. As the Liberty prepared to depart, with the first group of coalition observers, Jake stood on the bridge watching Nexus Station shrink behind them. The aliens thought they were getting military assistance. What they were actually getting was a crash course in what happened when evolution created the perfect warriors and gave them technology. The Kalara system had been under siege for 3 months when the human ships arrived. Colonel Danny Price stood on the bridge of the transport vessel, watching the battle zone through the main display. Burning wrecks of coalition ships drifted between the planets like metal tombstones, while Vorthan forces maintained their blockade with methodical efficiency. "Looks like a typical alien engagement," said Staff Sergeant Monica Bell, studying the tactical readouts. She had fought in the urban warfare campaigns of New Detroit and understood how battles could get stuck in patterns that favored the stronger side. "They're fighting like it's a medieval siege," observed Corporal Jake Sullivan. His experience with asymmetric warfare in the Pacific conflicts had taught him to look for unconventional solutions to impossible problems. Colonel Price nodded as he reviewed the coalition's defensive positions. The alien forces had established a standard perimeter around the inhabited planets, using their ships as mobile fortresses while waiting for Vorthon reinforcements to arrive. It was textbook defensive warfare, which meant it was predictable and ultimately doomed to fail. "Major Grant, set up our command post on the surface," Price ordered. "I want full integration with coalition forces but maintain independent communication systems." Major Lisa Grant had commanded forward operating bases in 3 different Earth conflicts. She understood that working with allies meant trusting them with some things while keeping control of others. Within 6 hours, she had established a command center that looked nothing like the coalition's organized but vulnerable headquarters. The human base was hidden, dispersed, and hardened against attack in ways that confused their alien allies. Coalition officers visited the site and found themselves unable to locate critical systems that were camouflaged or buried underground. Every entrance had multiple escape routes, every communication array had backup systems, and every defensive position covered 2 others. "Why do you hide your command center?" asked Colonel Velkrin, the coalition's senior ground commander. "The Vorthons know we are here." "Knowing we're here and knowing where to hit us are different things," Lisa explained. "They can see the general area, but they can't target our critical systems effectively." The first joint patrol launched 2 days later under Captain Frank Johnson's command. His mixed unit of humans and coalition soldiers moved through the contested territory between the defensive lines, where neither side maintained permanent control, but both sides sent regular reconnaissance missions. The coalition soldiers moved, in tight formation, following standard patrol protocols that had been developed over centuries of peaceful exploration. They carried energy weapons that could disable enemies without permanent harm, wore bright uniforms that identified their allegiance clearly, and transmitted regular position reports to their headquarters. The human soldiers moved like ghosts. Sergeant Emma Parker led the advance element, using terrain features to mask their movement while maintaining communication through hand signals and encrypted short-range transmissions. They wore adaptive camouflage that changed color based on their surroundings, carried weapons designed to kill efficiently, and seemed to disappear whenever they stopped moving. "Your soldiers are very difficult to track," observed Lieutenant Keksevol, a young coalition officer assigned to learn human tactics. "That's the idea," Emma replied. "If the enemy can't find you, they can't shoot you." The patrol made contact with Vorthon scouts 3 hours into their mission. The coalition soldiers immediately took defensive positions and prepared to engage in formal combat, broadcasting warnings and demands for surrender according to galactic military law. The human soldiers vanished. Lieutenant Keksvol found himself alone with his coalition troops facing a Vorthon patrol that outnumbered them 2-1. The enemy soldiers were heavily armed and armored, advancing with the confidence of warriors who had never lost a fair fight. Then the Vorthons started disappearing. The first enemy soldier simply fell down without warning. His companions looked around in confusion, trying to identify the threat. A second Vorthon collapsed, then a third. The remaining scouts began firing wildly at shadows, their disciplined formation dissolving into panic. Sergeant Emma Parker materialized behind the Vorthon commander and placed her combat knife against his throat. "Surrender," she said in the Vorthon language, "or join your friends." The surviving enemy soldiers looked around and realized they were surrounded by humans who had appeared from nowhere. Their weapons were trained on empty air while human rifles were aimed at their heads from concealment they could not even see. "How?" asked the Vorthon commander as he dropped his weapon. "Practice," Emma replied. Lieutenant Keksevol wrote a detailed report about the patrol, but his superiors had trouble believing his description of human combat tactics. Coalition military doctrine assumed that superior firepower and better defensive positions determined the outcome of engagements. The idea that soldiers could become effectively invisible and strike from any direction violated their understanding of how warfare worked. The success of the first patrol led to requests for human advisors throughout the battle zone. Captain Chris Adams found himself training coalition soldiers who had never learned to think of combat as anything other than formal dueling between organized forces. Your natural instinct is to form up and advance directly toward the enemy, Chris explained to a group of confused alien officers. That works when you have superior numbers and firepower. When you don't, you need to be smarter. But how do we coordinate attacks if our forces are dispersed and hidden? Asked Major Tailson, a coalition veteran who had commanded defensive forces for 15 years. You don't coordinate attacks, Chris replied. You coordinate effects. Every unit creates problems for the enemy. They don't all have to be in the same place or doing the same thing. The concept was revolutionary to species that had developed warfare as an extension of group cooperation. Human military doctrine assumed that individual units would operate independently while contributing to larger objectives, but coalition forces were used to centralized command and synchronized operations. Lieutenant Jake Sullivan worked with coalition engineers to modify their equipment for human-style operations. The aliens had built their military technology for straightforward, predictable use in formal battles. Human modifications turned defensive systems into offensive weapons, communication equipment into psychological warfare tools, and transportation vehicles into mobile weapons platforms. You changed our shield generators into jamming devices, observed Dr. Heltar, a coalition scientist who was studying human innovations. Same technology, different application, Jake explained. Your shields block incoming energy. Our jammers broadcast interference that disrupts enemy systems. The physics are identical, but using defensive technology for offensive purposes violates the principles of civilized warfare, Dr. Heltar protested. Civilized warfare is what you do when both sides agree to follow the same rules, Jake replied. The Vorthans stopped being civilized when they started conquering planets. Now you either adapt or die. The transformation of coalition tactics created confusion throughout the Vorthan chain of command. Commander Vexikar had been systematically defeating coalition forces for 2 years using proven strategies that overwhelmed enemy defenses through superior firepower and numbers. Suddenly, his enemies were behaving unpredictably. They are not where our intelligence reports place them, Vexikar told his staff officers. Our attacks hit empty positions while they strike our supply lines from directions that should be impossible. Perhaps their reinforcements include mercenaries from a warrior culture, suggested his tactical advisor. Vexikar studied the battle reports with growing frustration. Coalition forces were achieving impossible victories using tactics that made no sense according to established military doctrine. They appeared to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, striking when least expected and vanishing before effective. Counterattacks could be organized. Find out what has changed, he ordered. Our enemy is using new methods. We must understand these methods before they cost us the entire campaign. Meanwhile, Admiral Tylvan watched the tactical displays in the Coalition Command Center with amazement and growing unease. Human advisors had transformed isolated skirmishes into components of a larger campaign that was systematically destroying Vorthan control over the contested systems. They plan battles like we plan engineering projects, he told his staff. Every action serves multiple purposes. Every victory creates opportunities for additional victories. The humans were not just fighting individual battles. They were reshaping the entire nature of the conflict, turning the Vorthan advantages into disadvantages, while creating new forms of warfare that the enemy could not counter effectively. Colonel Price reviewed the weekly reports with satisfaction. His forces had achieved their objectives ahead of schedule and below projected casualties. More importantly, they had demonstrated that the Vorthans could be defeated by opponents who refused to fight according to established rules. Ready for Phase 2? Asked Major Grant. Send the message to Earth Command, Price replied. Tell them we need real soldiers now. The demonstration is over. Intelligence Officer Jexrin stared at the data streams flowing across his workstation in the Coalition Intelligence Center. For weeks, he had been tracking human military operations, trying to understand how such a small force could achieve such dramatic results. What he discovered made his blood turn cold. The humans were not just good soldiers. They were something far more dangerous. Director Miltar, Jexrin called to his supervisor. You need to see this immediately. Director, Miltar approached the workstation, his tentacles moving nervously as he sensed his subordinate's distress. What have you found? The humans have been monitoring our communications for decades, Jexerin said, displaying intercepts of galactic military transmissions. Every battle we fought against the Vorthans, every tactical manual we produced, every technological development we made, they recorded it all. The implications hit Director Miltar like a physical blow. That means they designed their entire military specifically to counter galactic warfare methods, Jexerin confirmed. Their weapons, their ships, their tactics. Everything was built to fight us before we even knew they existed. On the planet's surface, Lieutenant Colonel Matt Thompson was briefing coalition commanders about human military capabilities. The revelation had been authorized by Earth Command after the success of the initial operations, but Thompson could see the shock and fear in the aliens' eyes as they realized what they had invited into their war. Earth Defense Command has been preparing for first contact with hostile alien forces since we achieved faster-than-light travel, Thompson explained to the silent room. Every human military system was designed with galactic-level threats in mind. Colonel Velkrin, who had worked closely with human forces for weeks, spoke carefully. You were planning to fight us? We were planning to fight anyone who might threaten Earth, Thompson replied honestly. Our analysis indicated that any spacefaring civilization capable of reaching our system would likely be either exploring or conquering. We prepared for both possibilities. Major Sarah Mitchell stood before a holographic display showing the Vorthan fortress that her special operations team had destroyed the previous week. Coalition military engineers still could not understand how humans had penetrated defenses that were considered impregnable by galactic standards. The fortress was built according to standard galactic defensive principles, Sarah explained to the assembled coalition officers. Energy shields, sensor networks, automated defensive systems, all designed to stop conventional attacks from predictable directions. How did you bypass the shields? Asked General Kyle Tum, the coalition's chief engineer. We didn't bypass them, Sarah replied. We went through them. She activated a tactical replay showing her soldiers moving through the fortress like they belonged there. The human infiltrators had used techniques that seemed impossible to observers who understood only conventional warfare. Your soldiers moved through solid walls, observed Dr. Heltar, still studying the recordings. Maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, waste disposal networks, Sarah listed. Every fortress has weak points that builders don't think about. Because they focus on stopping direct attacks, we think about everything. Captain Alex Turner worked with coalition engineers in the Equipment Modification Center, where human improvements to alien technology had created weapons and systems that operated far beyond their original specifications. The coalition had built tools for exploration and peaceful defense. Humans had turned them into instruments of war. Your modifications improve efficiency by 300%, said Chief Engineer Pilson, examining a human-upgraded coalition rifle. How is this possible? You built this weapon to disable enemies without permanent harm, Alex explained. We rebuilt it to kill enemies as efficiently as possible. Different goals, different designs. But the basic technology is identical, Pilson protested. Technology is neutral, Alex replied. Purpose determines function. You design things to avoid causing harm. We design things to solve problems permanently. The philosophical difference was becoming clear to coalition observers. Their species had developed technology to improve life, explore space, and maintain peace. Humans had developed technology to win conflicts, eliminate threats, and survive in hostile environments. General Helen Roberts coordinated the strategic response to Vorthon reinforcements from the main command center. Coalition officers watched in fascination and terror as she deployed human forces according to plans that had been prepared before Earth even knew about the Galactic War. You already had battle plans for this conflict, Admiral Tealvin observed, studying the tactical displays. We had battle plans for every possible galactic conflict scenario, Helen confirmed. Our strategic planning department has been wargaming alien invasion scenarios for 50 years. 50 years, Tealvin repeated weakly. We assume every first contact situation is potentially hostile until proven otherwise, Helen explained. Earth's survival depends on being prepared for threats we haven't discovered yet. The Coalition officers exchanged glances that mixed admiration with fear. Humans had been preparing to fight galactic wars before they knew galactic civilization existed. Their entire military development had been aimed at countering threats that other species considered theoretical. Meanwhile, in Vorthan space, War Master Drextel studied intelligence reports that made no sense according to everything the Empire knew about biological limitations. The humans fought like machines but adapted like living creatures, using technology in ways that violated the basic principles of military engineering. They modify captured equipment faster than we can develop countermeasures, reported his chief technician. Our weapons become their weapons within hours of capture. What about their casualties? Drextel asked. Minimal. They seem to avoid taking losses through methods we cannot understand or counter. Drextel had commanded Vorthan forces for 20 years, conquering dozens of worlds and defeating every enemy the Empire had encountered. The humans represented something outside his experience and beyond his ability to understand. They fight like they were born for warfare, he told his staff officers. Every action serves multiple purposes. Every victory creates opportunities for additional victories. They do not just win battles, they eliminate the enemy's ability to continue fighting. Back on Nexus Station, Dr. Veltar presented his analysis of human military psychology to the Coalition Council. His findings were disturbing to species that had never encountered true predatory intelligence applied to technological warfare. Humans view conflict as natural selection in action, he explained to the silent assembly. They believe that survival requires the ability to destroy threats completely and efficiently. Their entire civilization is organized around this principle. Are they a threat to us? Asked Ambassador Zixtal. They are a threat to anyone who threatens them, Dr. Veltar replied. The question is whether we can remain valuable allies rather than becoming potential enemies. The implications were staggering. Humans had not just joined the Coalition's war, they had revealed themselves as the apex predators of galactic civilization. Their technology, tactics, and psychology were all designed for one purpose: winning conflicts by any means necessary. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson concluded his briefing with information that left Coalition commanders speechless. Earth defense. Command estimates that full human military deployment would require approximately 6 months to achieve complete victory over the Vorthan Empire. 6 months? Gasped Colonel Velkrin. The Empire controls hundreds of systems with millions of ships. Yes, Thompson replied calmly. Our analysis indicates that their size and centralized command structure make them vulnerable to systematic disruption. Large empires collapse quickly when their communication and supply networks are properly targeted. The Coalition leaders realized they had not hired military advisors or mercenary soldiers. They had awakened something that had been watching, learning, and preparing to fight galactic wars for decades. Humanity had not just joined their conflict, they had demonstrated that they could win it completely. The question now was what would happen after the Vorthans were defeated. The galaxy had learned what apex predators looked like when they developed starships and organized armies, but no one knew what those predators would do with a galactic civilization that could no longer defend itself against them. Earth had revealed its true nature, and everything would change because of it. Admiral Ben Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the final phase of Operation Galactic Storm unfold across dozens of star systems simultaneously. The massive holographic display showed human-led Coalition forces striking Vorthan, positions with precision that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Every attack was coordinated, every victory led to the next target, and every Vorthan response played into human strategic planning. Vorthan High Command is requesting immediate negotiations, reported Communications Officer Lisa Park. They're offering complete withdrawal from all occupied Coalition territories. Tell them we'll consider it after they surrender their entire fleet, Ben replied calmly. Withdrawal is not the same as defeat. The Vorthan Empire had learned the difference between fighting civilized species and fighting apex predators. Their military doctrine, perfected through centuries of conquest, had been systematically destroyed by enemies who refused to follow any recognizable rules of warfare. In the Vorthon capital system, War Master Drextel stared at reports that described the complete collapse of Imperial military power. Human forces had not just defeated Vorthon armies. They had eliminated the Empire's ability to wage war through methods that seemed like magic to species trained in conventional combat. They destroyed our supply networks first, his logistics coordinator reported. Then they eliminated our communication systems. By the time we realized what was happening, our fleets were isolated and helpless. How many systems do we still control? Drextel asked. 17, sir. Down from 300 at the start of the offensive. Drextel closed his eyes and felt the weight of total defeat settling on his shoulders. The Empire had been dismantled in less than 4 months by an enemy that seemed to understand Vorthon weaknesses better than the Vorthons understood them themselves. Request a meeting with the human command, he ordered. We need to discuss surrender terms before they decide. We're no longer worth negotiating with. On Nexus Station, Commander Zixtel watched the peace negotiations with emotions he could not name. The humans sat across from Vorthon representatives with the calm confidence of predators who had proven their dominance completely. They offered terms that were generous by galactic standards but absolute by military ones. Complete disarmament of all Vorthon military forces, Admiral Ben Clark read from the human proposal. Destruction of all weapons manufacturing facilities. Permanent human observers on all former Imperial worlds. Reparations to be paid to all conquered species over a period of 50 standard years. The Vorthon delegation had no choice but to accept. Their empire was broken, their fleets destroyed, and their ability to resist eliminated. The humans had demonstrated that continued fighting would result in complete extinction rather than honorable defeat. You could have destroyed us completely, observed War Master Drextel during a private moment with Admiral Clark. Yes, Ben replied simply. That's why you're surrendering instead of fighting to the death. You understand the alternative. The peace treaty was signed 3 days later in a ceremony that marked the end of the Vorthon Empire and the beginning of a new galactic order. The Coalition had won their war, but everyone present understood that humanity was now the dominant military power in known space. Colonel Bradshaw supervised the demobilization of human combat forces while establishing permanent Earth Defense Force bases throughout Coalition territory. The process was efficient and professional, but Coalition observers noted that human military infrastructure was designed for rapid expansion rather than peaceful withdrawal. You're building bases, not temporary outposts, observed Coalition. General Kyle Tam. Peace requires strength to maintain it, Brad explained. Earth learned long ago that winning wars is easier than preventing them. The human bases were strategically positioned to control major trade routes, communication networks, and resource systems throughout Coalition space. To casual observers, they looked like defensive installations. To military analysts, they represented the foundation of an empire that could control galactic civilization without appearing to conquer it. Dr. Rachel Morgan worked with Coalition scientists to establish protocols for ongoing human integration into galactic society. Her research focused on psychological compatibility between species, but her findings troubled Coalition leaders who understood their implications. Humans view other species as either allies, enemies, or potential threats that haven't revealed their intentions yet, she reported to the Integration Council. They assume conflict is inevitable and prepare for it constantly. Are we allies or potential threats? Asked Dr. Veltar. That depends on whether Coalition interests continue to align with human interests, Rachel replied honestly. Humans maintain alliances as long as they serve mutual benefit. When they don't, humans adapt. The conversation revealed the fundamental challenge of human integration into galactic civilization. Every other species had developed cooperative instincts that made peaceful coexistence natural. Humans had developed competitive instincts that made peaceful coexistence conditional on continued advantage. Meanwhile, Intelligence Officer Jexerin compiled his final report on human military capabilities for the Coalition Intelligence Service. His analysis painted a picture that would disturb galactic leaders for generations to come. Human forces numbered fewer than 50,000 soldiers during the entire conflict, he wrote. Earth Defense Command estimates their total military capacity at over 2 billion trained personnel with supporting infrastructure designed for galactic-scale operations. The numbers were staggering. Humans had ended the war using less than 1% of their available military power. The species that had seemed like salvation now appeared more like a sleeping giant that could reshape galactic civilization according to their own interests. They have been preparing for galactic conquest since they achieved spaceflight, Jexrin continued in his report. Their integration into coalition society represents the first phase of systematic expansion that will eventually encompass the entire galaxy. On Earth, President Karen Walsh addressed the Global Defense Council about humanity's new role in galactic affairs. The discussion focused on long-term strategy for managing alien civilizations that were now dependent on human protection, but potentially resentful of human dominance. The aliens invited us to solve their war, she told the assembled leaders. Now they're discovering that we solve problems permanently. The question is whether they can adapt to a galaxy where humans set the rules. What if they can't adapt? Asked Defense Secretary Mike Torres. Then we'll help them understand why adaptation is preferable to the alternatives, Karen replied. The casual way humans discussed managing entire civilizations revealed their natural assumption that superior capability created responsibility for controlling outcomes. Species that could not defend themselves needed guidance from species that could, whether they wanted it or not. Ambassador Linda Martinez established the first permanent Earth embassy on Nexus Station, where her diplomatic mission focused on managing the transition from galactic war to human-supervised peace. Her staff included military advisors, intelligence analysts, and economic specialists whose job was to ensure that coalition interests remained aligned with human interests. The aliens are learning to live in a galaxy where Earth exists, she reported to the State Department. Some are adapting faster than others, but they all understand that cooperation with humanity is not optional. During her first diplomatic reception, Linda casually mentioned Earth's history to curious alien dignitaries. Her description of human conflicts made the recent galactic war seem like a minor border dispute by comparison. Your species fought a war that killed 60 million people over ideological differences? Asked Ambassador Zixtal, his four eyes wide with shock. Several times, Linda replied calmly. Humans take ideas seriously enough to die for them. It makes us reliable allies and dangerous enemies. The reception ended early as alien diplomats excused themselves to file urgent reports about humanity's capacity for warfare. Earth's peaceful history included conflicts that dwarfed anything in recorded galactic civilization. The galaxy had learned what apex predators looked like when they developed starships and organized armies. Now they were discovering what happened when those predators decided to bring order to chaotic civilizations through strength rather than consensus. Humanity had not just won a war. They had announced their arrival as the galaxy's new dominant species, and everything would change to accommodate their vision of how civilized societies should function.